Picture this. It's 1871. You're lying in bed in the middle of the night. The gas lamps outside are flickering softly, casting weird shadows on your wall. And suddenly, you hear it. A harsh, metallic screeching sound coming from the dark hallway. Then comes a heavy, rhythmic thud, followed by the sound of grinding brass gears. You look down, and crawling slowly across your wooden floor, straight toward your feet, is a heavy porcelain baby with wide, dead eyes that never blink. Back on August 29, 1871, the United States Patent Office officially stamped approval on patent number 118,435. An inventor named George P. Clarke thought he'd built the next big thing in children's toys, the world's first mechanical, self-crawling baby doll. But honestly, what he actually unleashed on Victorian America was a walking nightmare. A machine packed with iron rods, sharp brass cogwheels, and a frozen face that terrified almost every kid who saw it. History tried its best to forget this creepy invention, but tonight we're opening the dusty 1871 patent vaults, looking at the horrifying engine hidden inside its stomach, and exposing a deeply disturbing secret found inside one of these surviving dolls over a century later. So do me a favor, turn off your lights, lock your doors, and stick with me for the next 20 minutes. Because if you think modern Hollywood invented creepy dolls, you're about to realize the real horror started over 150 years ago. Now, to get why this thing was built in the first place, you have to understand what America was going through in 1871. The Civil War had just ended a few years earlier. The Industrial Revolution was booming, and everyone was obsessed with machinery. Steam engines, clockwork mechanisms, factory automation. Inventors were racing to mechanize everything they could get their hands on. Up until then, dolls were simple. They were soft, stuffed with cotton or rags, and made for cuddling. But George Clarke wanted to push the boundaries. He wanted to engineer a doll that could actually imitate human life. Here's where things get wild. Look at Clarke's original patent drawings. If you take off the doll's dress, there is no soft body at all. Its entire torso is literally an open iron cage filled with clockwork springs, drive shafts, and heavy brass gears. Hidden under its chest were two large brass wheels connected to an axle. On the side of its waist, there was a keyhole. You'd take a heavy metal key, wind up the spring inside its stomach, and set it down. Once released, the clockwork engine forced the iron arms and legs to violently lurch forward, mimicking a baby crawling. Except it didn't look like a real baby at all. Because of all the cast iron and heavy clockwork inside, the doll weighed a ton. It couldn't turn or curve, it just lurched forward in a straight, unstoppable line. And it was loud.
The gears ground against each other with a harsh, grating screech that rang out across quiet Victorian homes. To make matters worse, the head was made of heavy plaster or porcelain, with glassy eyes fixed in a blank, unblinking stare. As the mechanical body lurched across the room, the weight of the head made it wobble side to side in this weird, jerky motion. Imagine being a 6-year-old child in 1871, sitting on the carpet, watching this cold, heavy machine in a white dress lurch toward you while grinding its gears. It didn't feel like a sweet new toy. It felt like a little metal creature hunting you down. Psychologists today have a name for why this bothers us so much. They call it the uncanny valley. It's that deep, gut-wrenching discomfort you feel when something looks almost human, but your brain knows something is horribly wrong. Clarke's crawling baby was practically the poster child for the uncanny valley in 19th century America. The creepy contrast between a delicate, innocent baby dress and the cold, oily brass machinery churning inside it just made people uncomfortable. And honestly, the culture back then made it creepier. Victorian America in the 1970s was weirdly obsessed with death and the supernatural. Child mortality rates were tragically high back then, and families spent a lot of time in mourning. It was totally normal for parents to take post-mortem photos of their deceased infants, posing them as if they were just sleeping. At the exact same time, spiritualism and seances were sweeping the country. People were fascinated by the idea of bringing inanimate objects to life or contacting things from the other side. So when George Clarke built a machine designed to mimic the uncanny movement of an infant, it tapped right into that dark, morbid fascination. Unsurprisingly, the doll was a total commercial flop. Parents hated it because it was way too expensive, heavy enough to crush a child's fingers if dropped, and honestly, it just scared the daylights out of their kids. Production stopped pretty quickly, and most of these dolls ended up thrown in wood stoves, scrapped for metal, or left to rot in dark attics. Because so few were made, George Clarke's 1871 crawling baby became one of the rarest historical artifacts in the world. Today, only a tiny handful of them still exist, mostly locked away in private collections or behind glass at museums like the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. But here's the story that still sends chills down my spine. A few decades ago, a private collector in New England bought an original 1871 Clarke doll at an estate sale. It had been sitting sealed inside an old wooden trunk in a dark attic for over 80 years. The collector wanted to restore the gears, so he carefully undid the buttons on the doll's dress and opened the iron chest plate. Tightly tangled inside the brass clockwork was a faded lock of real human hair, and right beside it was a tiny piece of paper stained with antique machine grease with a handwritten note dated 1874 that said, "May he walk forever." Was it a grieving mother trying to preserve a piece of her lost child inside a moving machine? Or was it some bizarre Victorian ritual? Nobody knows for sure, but finding that lock of hair buried inside the gears turned a creepy vintage toy into a downright haunting mystery. So when you think about it, George Clarke accidentally created something much bigger than a failed toy. Look at movies today: Chucky, Annabelle, M. Five Nights at Freddy's. Hollywood makes millions of dollars off our fear of living dolls and creepy animatronics. But long before movie cameras or computers existed, an inventor in 1871 wound up a metal key, placed a brass-filled doll on a rug, and created the world's very first mechanical nightmare. So let me ask you something. If you were walking through a dark, empty museum at 2 in the morning and you suddenly heard rusty brass gears starting to turn on their own behind a glass display, what would you do? Would you stick around to see what happens, or would you run for the nearest exit? Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you love strange, forgotten history and dark mysteries like this, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight, and sleep tight.